webinar together, and for everybody attending for putting this time aside to listen to us. The idea here is to share a recent project we've developed. We've run an LCA life cycle assessment of our leathers, and we believe this is a very important project, not only for PRIMEASIA, but also to the way people see leather and discuss about the impact of leather. So we thought it was important to share with this group. Before we get to the project itself, it's important for us to cover some basic concepts about what a LCA is and why we decided to go that path. When we talk about life cycle assessment, currently this is one of the most reliable methods for environmental impact assessment. So it helps us to understand where those impacts are in different stages of the life of a product. But it also helps us, it allows us to identify the hotspots, so we can not only see what are the major impacts in our supply chain, in our processing stage, but we can understand where they are. By having those more accurate information, we are also able to address them more efficiently. So we see also LCA as an important management tool, environmental management tool, that help us to make sure we are going in the right direction when we are looking at achieving our corporate sustainability goals. Not only that, we also think this is very important because there's a lot of discussions about the impact of leather. Can leather be made sustainably? And if we don't have the enough data, it's hard to answer those questions. And that's what we've been doing with this project, is to have scientific-based, reliable data that we can use in those discussions. It's important also that we mentioned the company we partnered with to run this project. And the reason for that is that LCAs, they are very precise, they are very detailed in terms of assessing impact, but also if you don't know what you're measuring, you don't know how to measure it properly. So we looked for a company. We've partnered with Spin 360, that is a company that has been working with LCAs, and more specifically LCAs in the leather, in the luxury, in the footwear sectors for more than 10 years. Because that gives them a critical view of our sector, the workflows, the waste streams, and by doing that, we are more accurate in measuring our impacts. Not only that, we thought it was also important to look for an organization that is working with different companies, different multi-stakeholder organizations around the world. And this Federico Brugnoli, who is the director of this company, he also helped to write the product environmental footprint category rules in Europe for leather. So he has a very in-depth understanding of the methodologies and the standards accepted to run a LCA, which adds credibility to any information when we follow those standards. Now, going into more details about our life cycle assessment, I think it's important to give an overview and to show some details of the scope, the length of this project. First, it's important also to mention that this life cycle assessment was performed following the ISO 14040 and 14044. It also followed the main product category rules in Europe, so they are in line with the most credible, most recognized international standards for life cycle assessment. And when we talk about the things we covered, what we assessed in this LCA, I believe we can comfortably say that this is probably the most comprehensive life cycle assessment that has ever been done in our industry. And the reason I'm saying that is because we covered 3 different raw materials. So we assessed raw materials from Australia, Brazil, and the US. We also looked at 6 different retaining formulations and 6 different finishings in leather. Not only that, when we are talking about collecting primary data, so not rely on generic information, assumptions, we collect the primary data from 3 different slaughterhouses, 3 wet blue tanneries. We assessed our 2 retention and finishing facilities in China and Vietnam, and we covered 5 countries in total. So it gives a pretty good overview of the leather industry by assessing those aspects. Not only that, we covered around 56 machines in this process. We evaluated more than 206 process phases in the leather processing, and we collected more than 3,000 data points. The LCA covered things such as raw materials, so the impact of the animal raising, slaughtering, all the leather processing, and also the transportation of hides and leathers between different tanneries. It does not cover the transportation of the finished product to footwear factories. It doesn't cover footwear manufacturing nor end of life. Just to give an idea of how many of the amount of data covered in this project, when you consider all the different environmental aspects covered, the different areas of the supply chain we researched, the environmental indicators we selected, and the amount of products covered, we ended up with more than 27,000 indicators. So it's a pretty detailed research, and that gives us a lot of data, a lot of thoughts that we can use in managing our impacts. And talking about all those indicators, categories, it's first one point that it's good to share is that when we were starting this project, we thought it was important to cover a range of indicators that would help us to not only have that information with us and use in our internal discussions, but something that would follow the main standards that we could report with HIG, that we could report following the environmental product declarations. So we covered 14 different indicators in this research. So it gives us a lot of different indicators around the environmental impacts. Normally you see people talking about global warming as the main thing, water usage, but here we are talking about 14 different impacts that were covered in this research. For this presentation today, we're going to be talking about 4 specifically. These are the ones that are more popular, that people talk more often, just to make the presentation a bit easier to share with you. But we need to keep in mind that in total, we are talking about 14 different indicators evaluated in this life cycle assessment. Now, talking about our findings, I believe the main thing here is not to think about a number, but to think about an approach, what LCA allows us to do, how we can use that information, and this is what we want to share with you. One of the views we can see when we start evaluating life cycle assessment, we are able to understand our impacts separated between raw materials, so what comes from the life of the animal and what comes from the core processes. And when I talk about core processes here, I'm talking about everything from bean housing to finished leather. And these are just some examples. So when you talk about global warming potential here, we could identify that 53% of the global warming potential comes from the raw material, and 46% comes from the core processes. So we need to work on those 46% to find ways to further reduce. When you talk about eutrophication, it's completely different. You have 85% of the impact coming from raw materials. So it's far from our operations, and it doesn't make sense for us to try to address eutrophication in the core processes if 85% comes from raw materials. So if we want to work on this area, we need to work with our suppliers. We need to work in the supply chain. On the other hand, if you look at abiotic depletion, so how much of fossil fuels are used, it's the opposite. The impact is more concentrated in the core processes. So here it's easier for us if we address with our wet blue suppliers, if we address in our own facilities, we can get easier results just by looking at the core processes. So it's really a way of understanding where the impact is and where we need to address first. Not only that, it gives us also a lot of details about those impacts. This table here, it's only about global warming potential, but for each product we assessed in our research, we got a similar table for each of those 14 indicators. And this gives us not only a view of where the impacts are in terms of the supply chain, the value chain. So if it comes from the raw materials, beam housing, tanning, retaining, finishing, but it also it covers a lot of different impact categories. So raw materials, water consumption, thermal energy, electricity, wastewater. So it's really detailed. And we emphasize here aggregated because these are just the macro categories, but we need to also have in mind that all those categories, they are made up of many other indicators. Just as an example, chemicals, you see two main categories within chemicals, but you have more than 100 chemicals within those categories. So it gives us a really detailed level of information, and we can start looking exactly where those impacts are to see what is more efficient how is more efficient for us to address those impacts. And this is a good example of how we are starting to do it. We can identify hotspots. So what we did here, we removed the raw material side and we start looking at our core processes. And then when we look at the core processes, we can start looking at where the main impacts are. So for example, global warming potential, we could see that 50% or 46% of the impact related to global warming potential comes from chemicals. So this is the first area to address. When you talk about eutrophication, it came from the source of energy, and we can do that evaluation for each of the categories. So this is a very good way of looking to our impacts. And from that, we created improvement indexes, because it's a visual way of seeing where we need to look first, what we should prioritize. So it's don't pay attention too much to the numbers, but it's just a visual way of seeing where we need to work and where we're gonna get better results by addressing those areas. And the next step, after you know where to address first, is to understand how you can do that, what kind of actions you can plan to achieve more efficiencies and to reduce impacts. And these are just some of the examples. We are starting to create improvement hypotheses, because by understanding where the impacts are, we create improvement hypotheses that would allow us to address those impacts directly. And then we can start simulating the positive impact or the reduction in the impacts we have by implementing those hypotheses. This is just an exercise in one of the products we evaluated, where we can understand, okay, if we implement those hypotheses, what kind of improvements we get, and why do we need to do that? Because then we can cross-reference with our sustainability goals. We can understand if we are going in the right direction, if we should somehow change a little bit our plans. This is just an example. This is our sustainability goals to 2023. So we are talking about reducing amount of water, energy, increasing the amount of renewable energies, work with more sustainable supply chains. So we also address the side the part that is related to this to raw materials. So we can cross both sets of information and see if we are doing in the right direction. So again, I believe this is one of the most important messages here. LCAs are an important way of looking to what you are doing, identifying those impacts, and giving you insights of where you can improve them in a easier way. And this is a summary of what I've just said. You start from identifying those areas, those impacts, what you can do in terms of improving, creating actions. You can project what kind of improvements you'd get, enhancements, to see if it makes sense, if it's aligned with your sustainability goals. And after that, you can implement and start measuring your impacts again and going back in a circular approach. Here, it's we don't need to get into details, but just to give an example of how it helps us to visually see those impacts. We have here global warming potential, and we can have a view where it includes the impact of raw materials, but we can extract that as well and see what are the impacts that are coming only from our core processes, and then we can address the areas that are more important. So this is a good way. It's a ways of creating dashboards that allows you to have more critical evaluations of your impacts. And you can do the same thing for eutrophication, for abiotic depletion, for I went the other way around, for water use, and by doing so you become more efficient, more precise in making better products, in becoming more sustainable. Other things, LCAs allows you to compare against industry average to see how you're doing, if you got improved. Just some quick examples here. We are able to see that on average our products are performing 55% better than the industry average in terms of global warming potential, 40% better in terms of abiotic depletion, and 62% better in terms of water usage. You can also look for comparisons against other materials, but the most important part here, you can compare against yourself. LCA, it's a very good opportunity to understand where you can further improve your operations, where you can further gain efficiencies, and by working with that information, we can ensure that we are doing the right things to ensure that the leather is perceived as the right choice as a sustainable material. And that leads us to another quick discussion. Peter was talking about sustainability, the definition of sustainability, and we need to think also what is the definition of a sustainable product. And we start doing some exercises inside to identify the words, the areas that are more connected to sustainability when our customers are having those discussions, when we are having our discussions with our peers, and we start thinking, sustainability is connected more and more with being able to use more natural products, bio-based products. It's about making the most of byproducts of other industries, so you don't need to rely on new resources, virgin resources. Can we do things that are biodegradable, that will help us to reduce the amount of waste, things that are durable, that carries quality? Can we think about reuse, repair, recycle? For me, working with sustainability, this is one of the areas we need to discuss most. We need to ensure that we are not talking about disposable things, but things that will last and can be repaired. Can we manufacture it responsibly in a transparent way? Peter also mentioned the social part. Are we able to contribute for better social developments? And one of the most important things, how can we contribute to decarbonization of our society? We see that with climate change, one of the main things is to reduce our need for fossil fuels. And when we start crossing that with leather, we see, for example, that leather is one of the products that have the highest content of bio-based carbons. So it's funny that we have to do this kind of measurements, but nowadays everything needs to be backed by research, by testing. And when you test, it's not easy to find materials that comes with a bio-based content as high as leather. When you talk about being a byproduct, as long as there is beef consumption, there will be leather. And does it make sense to if you have that byproduct, to send them to landfills, to not add value to those products? We don't think so. We believe if you have that product available, you gotta make the most of it, and you gotta find ways of transforming it in valuable, durable products that can be used for other purposes. And we are not talking here about hypotheses. We are talking about something that's happening already. In 2019, just as an example, it's estimated that around 17% of the hides generated in the USA went to landfill. So this is a serious topic that we need to be considering. In terms of being biodegradable, leather is biodegradable, is compostable. There are different time frames, different rates of biodegradability. But the good thing here is that there are technologies you can improve that, you can address to make it more biodegradable and more compostable. And you see that leather is being used to make fertilizers, composting, but the industry needs to further develop, further moving that into that direction. Reuse, repair, recycle. I think we don't even need to talk about that. Leather is probably the most suitable material for the footwear, upholstery, fashion industry in terms of durability, in terms of being something that you can repair. And not only that, you see that there are more and more technologies available where you can also recycle leather, which is very important. When you talk about responsibly manufactured, about transparency, the leather industry is one of the industries that has the highest number of initiatives that were created to assess and to report the impacts of that industry in a transparent way. I have listed some examples there, but there are many others. LCA, as I tried to share with you in this presentation, it's also a very good tool that we can use to evaluate our impacts, to report in a more transparent way, but also to look for areas for improvement. But those tools, they need to be used. We as tanneries, as a leather industry, brands, we need to be sure that we are adopting those tools in order to improve that transparency. Social development, I'm not even covering the leather aspect, but if you think only about livestock production, we have that more than 1.5 billion people globally that relies on livestock production. Then you add the millions of people involved in leather processing. So there is a lot of space here to improve, to support social development. It's a matter of doing the things right and ensuring that we are promoting that development. And the last point here, decarbonization, with all these discussions about climate change, and we need to understand how we can use less fossil fuels. And I believe we need to look at this point in a more holistic way. There isn't one single answer, but you have a set of materials that you can use to reduce the amount of plastic, to reduce the amount of synthetic materials made from fossil fuels. So if you put leather, cotton, wool, jute, all the new bio-based materials being made with byproducts of the food industry, mushrooms, all these things, they have an important role, and the role is to replace plastic and to replace the fossil-based products. But that needs to be made in a transparent way. You shouldn't try to claim sustainability by claiming also the performance of other products. These are just some results of an article that has been published in a scientific journal, where it compared leather with all the alternative materials that are claiming to be an alternative to leather. And when you see, none of them have the attributes, the performance that is comparable to leather. Maybe they have one of the performances, but they don't deliver the same package. So we need to be transparent also in the way we communicate to our customers, to the market, about the products we use. You cannot sell a table made of wood and a table of made of plastic and try to compare it. The qualities are different, the performance is different, and you cannot compare it in terms of performance, but also in terms of footprint. So here is just a call for us to, as a group, to try to create more transparency in that area. And to finish here, I have just gone over my 25 minutes. It's important to understand that LCA is not the end, but it's the beginning of a continuous approach aiming at adopting more scientific-based evidence to manage our impacts. At PRIMEASIA, we've made a decision that we're going to be reviewing our LCA results every year, so we can understand how our performance, how our operations are helping us to achieve our sustainability goals. We are going through a third-party review right now for our LCA, so we can add further transparency. And we are starting to share also our LCA results in a more detailed way with our customers, with partners in industry-wide discussions, and also with HIG index, so that information can be used and can support those discussions in a more transparent way. So thank you very much. I know this topic sometimes it can be a bit complicated, but I would be happy to answer any questions. And not only myself, I think now we're gonna open a panel here for everybody in case you have any questions related to the other presentations. Thanks once again for your time.